all you literary legends and luminaries. I'm Julie, and welcome to a delightful episode of Booksmart. Today's book combines my two favorite shows thanks to the marriage of Half Pint and Elliot. It's Melissa Gilbert's Back to the Prairie, a home remade, a life discovered. Little House on the Prairie and 30-something. What could be better? If you've watched Booksmart before, you know how much of a Little House on the Prairie fan I am, and you also know that my favorite show of all time is 30-something. You may also know that I wasn't fond of Half Pint's first memoir, because it wasn't a memoir. It was an autobiography. In Prairie Tale, Gilbert spent all of 3 chapters on Little House on the Prairie. It was essentially about her whole life up to that point. With Back to the Prairie, I can appreciate the fact that nowhere on the cover does it say memoir. That alone calmed the memoir monster in me, because Back to the Prairie essentially covers everything from her last book until time of publication, which was 2022. Back to the Prairie isn't as theme-oriented as I'd hoped. I would have adored it even more if the book hadn't turned political. The foreword is written by Timothy Busfield, Elliot from 30-something. I just beamed as I read his beautiful introduction, hearing Elliot's voice as he described his wife's book. See, I liked Elliot more than Michael in 30-something. Yes, Elliot cheated on his wife, but Elliot grew throughout the 4-year show. Michael just sort of vacillated between really whiny and not so whiny, and then the whole Miles Drentel and DAA thing. Michael was just a poser. So I liked Elliot's character more and the plots that centered around him, much more than Moody Michael. I know this isn't the least bit objective of me, but at least I'm admitting that Timothy Busfield could have written garbage, and I would have adored it. Gilbert divides Back to the Prairie into 3 parts. The first part was my least favorite. It was too scattered and all over the place. I could not grasp her timeline at all. Flashbacks and flash forwards, and she's married to Tim, and then she's recounting her divorce, and well, it was very messy. It even got repetitive. She mentions more than once that Timothy Busfield used his retirement from the Guild to buy their cabin. I'm not sure why Gilbert chose to write in this fashion. The whole idea of the book was Back to the Prairie. So bring your reader to the prairie and describe the chaos you were leaving behind. But it's way scattered. She even mentions her first book, where her sister, Sarah, Darlene from Roseanne, challenges what Melissa wrote about their dad. And Melissa had no idea that her dad committed suicide. Now, this is crucial info, no doubt about it, but its placement was just so jumbled. Her Dancing with the Stars experience was also briefly mentioned and scattered about, mostly in relation to her injuries, but because that was a beloved show of mine until they fired Tom Bergeron, and then I never watched the show again. I would have loved to have known more of those details. Although I remember when I watched Gilbert on it, I wasn't fond of her partnership with Max because Max was a bit too full of himself for my liking. I would have preferred she partnered with Tony Dovolani, but I'm getting way off topic. Hey, kind of like the first part of Back to the Prairie. We learned how Tim and Melissa met and their relationship, but I wish she would have spent a bit more time developing that just because I'm nosy and really wanted to know more. But I must say I was disgusted at the fact that Melissa had never seen 30-something and Tim had never watched Little House on the Prairie. How could you not have? They do eventually watch each other's shows after they're together, but come on, guys. 2 iconic shows and you had never watched them before? I adore the parts when she's describing their new little home in the woods, a rundown place they found in the Catskills. She should have just focused more so on all that fun stuff. She talks about downsizing, and not the Marie Kondo way, but the Swedish death cleaning way, which is what I've been doing the past couple of years. Tim and Melissa have an auction and sell off their 30-something and Little House on the Prairie memorabilia. If only I could have gotten some of it. Gilbert also ties in her aging and laughs at her frozen forehead due to Botox, a nose job, and even weight loss and gain. She should have developed more about those issues as well, as it contrasts the Hollywood lifestyle with this new Prairie one. It's interesting to read about famous people's lack of money. Our financial state is really a matter of perception. Compared to my school teacher's salary, Melissa and Tim are rich beyond what I could imagine. However, if they compare their income with that of, say, George Clooney or Nicole Kidman, well, they're downright poor. Gilbert mentions how they couldn't afford many things, yet they have an apartment in New York City and the cabin in the Catskills, so it's all just relative. Gilbert calls their new home the Cabbage, a delightful combination of cottage and cabin. It sounds like it was a hoarder's home when they bought it, but structurally it's sound, so they are happy with their purchase. Gilbert is apparently more manly than Timothy Busfield when it comes to tools and building things. She describes all the cleaning and fixing and decorating and then moves on to the animals, which, of course, you know was my favorite part. I don't remember Gilbert's sense of humor in much of Prairie Tale. Of course, I was seething when I read that book, thinking the whole thing was going to be focused on Little House on the Prairie, so perhaps I just don't remember. But she's hilarious in this book, and I adore her personification of all their animal friends. So here's just a brief example, because I love how she personifies all the little guys. So they're cleaning up the house and the mess. And the clutter and mess were temporary, but the animals who peeked at us from the edge of the woods or wandered into the yard like the deer and the squirrels must have had a few moments of head scratching where they wondered what we were doing to their tranquil home. I'm sure we got terrible Yelp reviews from the mice we'd evicted. Oh, it's just so cute. I love that stuff. And you know I do, so I'm not being the least bit objective here. But let me forewarn you now. The book takes a turn. Her book gets political and kind of nasty. I hate politics, but more so I hate listening to people talk about politics because those that do know they're right and are convinced that their side is without error and is morally sound, no matter what side you're on. I can't stand it. Had Gilbert written about the chaos of our political environment prior to The Cabbage, it would have fit better in the book and it wouldn't have been so objectionable. So while I found a few of the things she wrote giggable, I simultaneously cringed knowing that it wasn't really necessary to write such things as it had little to do with the book. But therein lies the problem. Gilbert doesn't write theme-based memoirs no matter what her Prairie title suggests. It's her life story with the beginning where her first autobiography ended and its endpoint up to the time of publishing. When you write in that manner, it's more or less a summary of the stuff that happened to you, not really central with a theme or focused on assessing much reflection in regards to that theme. And when a writer does that, she forgets about her readers, and all we get are the monotonous details that really aren't necessary, which was, for me, the most disappointing part of the book. Had the book focused on her Back to the Prairie title, it would have been a much stronger, more expertly written book. So that was rather disappointing. Readers will get to experience COVID again. Yay, because who doesn't want to go through the pandemic again? I'm not fond of reading about that either, although I did relate to Timothy Busfield as he came home excited to have found Lysol wipes. I remember that day I came home from Target with a package of 3 Clorox wipes. It was like I won the lottery. I found it strange that the East Coast was still on lockdown come fall. Shoot, here in the Midwest, I went back to school in August and even sat through in-services where fellow teachers refused to wear a mask. I was a germaphobe before the pandemic, so you can imagine I about died. The book was published in 2022, so Gilbert wasn't able to provide much of a 2020 hindsight after the fact, like now how nobody cares if you have COVID and just go to work and school sick anyway, not caring who you infect. So that isn't Gilbert's fault, only that it was difficult to read about COVID in that emergent moment when now so much has changed in our attitudes. Other topics the book covers: new grandkids, Gilbert's many injuries, lots of people's names that I had no idea who they were, and many other topics that have little to do with the Prairie. Gilbert ties in Laura Ingalls Wilder quotes, which would have been positively delightful, but sometimes they felt a little forced and awkwardly integrated. Ultimately, here's what I wish Gilbert would have focused her memoir on, what she should have centered all her other information around. And let me read you this, because it is perfect, and unfortunately it comes so late in the book that she should have done it earlier on. So she goes and says, only once did we have so many eggs that I gave a dozen to a neighbor. Otherwise, we kept up with the girls who worked very hard for us and rarely, if ever, disappointed. I made a lot of frittatas through the spring. We also ate them hard-boiled, scrambled, soft-boiled, sunny-side up, over easy, ranchero style, and poached. We ate enough that our doctor, allowing our annual physical, suggested that we might want to join a gym and get more exercise. I suppose that was a polite way of saying, you guys are clearly enjoying the fat of the land and eating it too, but please watch your cholesterol. Like everyone else, we were working to strike a before and after balance. We had no answers to questions, only a gut feeling. Well, that and a new plant-based diet. It's about how to continue in this new reality without losing sight of all the things we've learned, I said to Tim one night after dinner. Needs versus wants, making things simpler and less complicated and being more self-reliant. Being mindful, Tim said, taking care of ourselves to the best of our ability. Yes, everyone is healing, I nodded. We have to try not to get caught up in the craziness again. The craziness of having too many things, of being spread too thin, of overspending and overdoing. For us, at least, things have gotten pretty simple. And it's so much easier to live this way. I was all for simplicity, no matter what it meant I had to tackle on my own. The carpet needed cleaning, no problem. I rented a carpet cleaner and washed the carpets. Plumbing issues, ditto. I canceled an appointment in the city one day, and the reason made me laugh as I said it. We are having the cesspool sucked out today, and I have to be there. This was my little house on the prairie. So if she just would have done all of that, it would have been so much better, because when Gilbert focuses on this kind of information and writes these kinds of passages, that's what brings us all back to the prairie. Her charming stories about chickens and deer, the beautiful descriptions of the leaves in the sky and the quiet. There was just so much potential for this book. And since I read it shortly before Thanksgiving, I really wish it would have focused on such ideas. A simpler life, a less chaotic life, a kinder life, a more mindful life. Even though Back to the Prairie didn't always come together for me, it was so worth the read, just because it's one more connection to Little House on the Prairie. I would say the book would make a perfect Christmas present since it is that time of year, but due to its political nature, I wouldn't give it as a gift, just because politics is about the most unholiday thing I can think of. Instead, buy them 30-something DVDs. It's never on any streaming service, and with our political climate as it is, well, maybe it's best to have a hard copy of something to watch, just in case something like Leave the World Behind happens. Thanks for watching. As always, my goal at Booksmart is to get a little bit smarter, one book at a time.